Now let's head into the new movie. What did I think about it? What's my review? Is it sad? Because to be honest, when you look at all of the other requels that have been made in the last few years, I mean, it makes the main character look really sad because of course they've aged out of their role and they're trying to behave like they were still the same person, and it's incredibly cringy.
I hereby commandeer this vehicle.
Man, fuck you. It's not a real thing.
It absolutely is a real thing.
No! God, please, no! No!
Welcome back to Torn Apart, and today we're talking about something that is dear to my heart, the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, Eddie Murphy, and the impact that he's led on my life and specifically on my childhood as well. And I'm doing all of this mostly because there is a fourth Beverly Hills Cop movie that is coming out. Well, it came out last week technically, so you're definitely a bit late on the hype train. The marketing has not been really good and it's releasing straight to Netflix, and I'm not really sure whether a lot of people are still intrigued by the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, whether they still care about it, or if it's been completely forgotten and the new generations have no idea what it is all about and why it's actually so successful.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
Especially because when you think about it, movies in the 80s and the 90s were all about cops, right? They were all about the angry cop versus the one who wants to respect the rules, the cop that is ready to sacrifice everything to save their country, their wife, or whoever the fuck. Or we had Die Hard movies where it's basically just cop against terrorists trying to kill them and never arrest them at the end of the day. Actually, when I think about it, in these movies there are not that many arrests, everyone dies. Is this the message that we're supposed to convey to the police right now? I don't think so. It was a different time. In fact, like if I look at other movies where the cops are the main protagonists that are released in the last few years, I'm not really that involved in them anymore, mostly because they refuse to give you like a three-dimensional look at the life of a cop. It's mostly that kind of like Blue Lives Matter mentality that I don't really stand behind. But in the 80s, in the 90s, it was completely different. They were like portrayed as these action heroes, very often fighting against corruption, and Eddie Murphy as a cop doing all of that was kind of revolutionary when I was a child, to be honest, because I was always seeing cops as these white dudes, almost like representing the cowboy kind of like thing where they came to save everyone at the expense of their own lives and safety.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
And when I rewatched all of these movies, well, I think there are some definitely interesting things to say, that it mostly to do with the first movie, because the second and third movie you could really tell that they were banking on Eddie Murphy's performance and fame, and they didn't really have that much to say about, well, about the police dynamics and the differences in between different states, and also about race relationships in the 80s and in the 90s in the United States. Having said that, before we actually give you my review of the fourth movie in the franchise, we're gonna go step by step and get back to the early 80s and the early 90s and have a look at these films. Have they aged well? Are they still as entertaining as before? And do we have anything new to explore with the fourth movie? Let's find out.
You haven't the slightest idea who you're dealing with.
First of all, the first movie was directed by Martin Brest, and of course it was starring Eddie Murphy at the beginning of his career, when he was starting to become quite famous, especially because of his stand-up shows, and honestly you could really tell that he was a force to be reckoned with. The rhythm and the pacing of this movie is insane. You barely care actually about the plot and about the crimes that are actually being dealt with when it comes to this film, which is something that you don't really say about most of these police investigation movies, but this has to do with Eddie Murphy, who really stands out as a cop who is not like other cops. Of course, he seems to be a bit of a rookie where when it comes to his attitude to solving crimes, he seems to be one of the people. He's not really acting like a tough guy like Bruce Willis was doing in the Die Hard franchise. He seems relatable, he seems approachable, and his entire life is kind of dedicated to fighting crime. He doesn't really have have anything else going on. Of course, across the entire franchise, he's gonna make different friendships, he's gonna find some ladies as well, but at the end of the day, he doesn't really have any romantic like couplings, as in he never gets married, you don't see him dating at all. He's mostly concerned about solving crimes, specifically crimes that tend to meddle with his private life. In the first film, for example, if we want to go back to the plot, Axel Foley's close friend Mikey Tandino is murdered soon after he arrives in Detroit, and Axel has to take up the investigation of the case, which leads him to the crime world of Beverly Hills. And to be honest, when rewatching this film, I was like having flashbacks about playing GTA Vice City, because the representation of Beverly Hills in this movie, the people within this universe just walking around in the street and how they're represented as well. Even the crimes that we're talking about, it's always cocaine, it's always like mishandling of money, it's always about corruption and basically like the villains being almost untouchable. This screams GTA Vice City to me, and I wouldn't be surprised that it was definitely one of the biggest influences of that game. That and probably other things like Scarface, of course, when it comes to the amount of violence specifically. But this movie here honestly has such a great sense of humor. I was literally laughing not even every 2-3 minutes, just because Eddie Murphy keeps riffing on the weirdest things possible, and he's so clever.
I was gonna call the article, Michael Jackson is sitting on top of the world, but now I think I might as well just call it, Michael Jackson can sit on top of the world just as long as he doesn't sit in the Beverly Palm Hotel, because there's no niggas allowed in there.
This is what I like about Eddie Murphy playing Axel Foley. He's so witty, and he's always has something new to say, and he always has an answer ready for people who try to challenge him. There is this moment, for example, that I really enjoy and I keep thinking back to. It's basically when he goes to confront the villain of the entire movie, basically, and he gets thrown out of a window, and the police immediately comes there and arrests him, because apparently people actually claimed that he was making a mess and he destroyed the window himself out of anger. And it's really interesting because Axel Foley could 100% tell them immediately that he's a cop and something weird is going on, but he doesn't really do that. He's kind of like hanging back and waiting to see what the police is gonna do, mostly because right now he's not in his jurisdiction, because of course Detroit and LA are really far from each other, so he's really testing the ground and seeing whether the police department of that area is able to actually solve that crime, and if he can actually cooperate with them, or if he should just go on a rogue mission by himself. And he waits until the very last second to tell them that he's a cop, also because he wants to see how people relate to him as an African American guy in that specific context. And I thought it was such a clever thing to do as a cop, but also as an African American person, where you're trying to understand who are your allies and whether they're gonna pin certain crimes on you without having any kind of proof, for example. And I don't know, it's something that really stuck to my mind, and it's something that doesn't really happen as often in the other films of the franchise. It is very clear, for example, that this movie is all about the Detroit way of investigating crime, which seems to be way more abrupt, way more glossy when it comes to what is supposed to be the law, and the LA way of solving crimes, which is by the book, following all the rules, and you have to wait to take action before someone above you tells you that you can actually go, and you're supported by a SWAT team or something like that.
Look, where I'm from, cops don't file charges against other cops. No, I don't want to do that.
And this was really interesting, seeing these two different worlds clash. Axel Foley being incredibly spontaneous and doing so much weird shit, and also trying to get away from basically the other LA cops who are trying to follow him, who are keeping an eye on him, because he's basically a bit dangerous, because you're not supposed to do this in a completely different state that has nothing to do with your jurisdiction, as I said before. Also, when you're supposed to be on holiday. There are so many things that I love about this film, and it has mostly to do with the pacing, of course, the dialogues, because Eddie Murphy, but everyone else is at the top of their game as well. The action is probably the thing that stands out the least when it comes to this film. You could really tell that, kind of like the Star Wars fights, people don't know how to shoot in these films. Like, honestly, there are so many moments where I'm just like, you should be dead right now. There is no way that they wouldn't be able to catch you at least once. And this gets worse and worse across all of the different different films. There is one point, for example, in the third film where literally Axel Foley is hiding behind a bench, like a park bench that is just made out of pieces of wood and metal, and this other guy with a machine gun is shooting at him, and he hides. Then Axel Foley shoots back, but it doesn't work. He hides behind the park bench again, and the other guy keeps shooting, and he doesn't get hit a single time. I mean, to be honest, you really need to suspend your disbelief at this point, because this movie doesn't want people to get hurt. And it's weird because it is said at the beginning of each of these films it's an R-rated movie. All of these are R-rated movies. You could tell mostly because of some nudity, and I think it has to do mostly with the swearing, because to be honest, it's not really gory in comparison to other horror films or even action films over the time. Because I mean, look at RoboCop. It's literally one of the most violent films that I've ever seen with that genre specifically. So I was really shocked to find out that Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley doesn't really get hurt that much like a John McClane type would do, but he's also very reckless. He jumps straight into action scenes without thinking, he starts doing things by himself without any kind of backup, and he puts a lot of people's lives in danger very often, constantly, from one film to the next. And it's only in the third film, towards the very end, where you've got a really, well, it's supposed to be a funny scene of these three characters all completely bloodied up, walking towards each other and kind of like sitting down and being like, what can I say, yet another Monday, am I right? But that is the only moment where I was actually fearing for Axel Foley's life and his friends' lives as well, because across the other films you know that they're not gonna get hurt. And very often also the opening thing of these films is having someone killed or someone getting dangerously close to being killed. So in the first film it's his friend, as I said before. In the second film, it's the police commissioner that he meets at the Beverly Hills station, who actually ends up not dying, by the way. He just gets transported to the hospital and he's not there for most of the movie. And in the third movie, it's the other police commissioner who works with Foley back in Detroit, who actually ends up getting killed in one of the weirdest action sequences that I've ever seen. I didn't really feel anything from it, and I was actually shocked that Axel Foley reacted the way that he did in that movie, but that is a completely different discussion. We'll go into it later because there's a lot of things to say about the way that this franchise has kept evolving across the years. But when it comes to the first film, these side characters are the best part. When you look at Judge Reinhold and John Ashton's performances, you could really tell that they represent these stereotypes of cops, and that Eddie Murphy is really playing with them and he's really challenging their beliefs. And it's honestly quite cool to see that there is some character development by the end of the film, and you actually see them change their rules, their way that they behave, and the way that they approach the law by the end of the film as well. If you want someone killed, Axel Foley will do it for you. Like, honestly, he'll be able to do it in like the first 15 minutes of the film, but you can't really say that he's one of those police investigators that like are trying to collect all the clues to finally get them behind bars. At the end of the day, it always ends with a shootout and they probably die, which is a bit of a shame, I think. Honestly, if I was the people behind the Beverly Hills Cop, I would have kept some of my villains at the back of our minds so that maybe they could come back in other films and you wouldn't have to redo all the work, all the world building when it comes to each and every single one of the criminals, and you would have had more time to develop other things, like more time to develop Axel Foley's inner life, for example, because I don't even think that we get to his apartment, besides maybe in the first film. We never go back to it, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Having said that, these are kind of the expectations that I want you to go in with the new movie, of course, knowing about this franchise. I'd really like to know what you think about it. Honestly, I grew up with these films and I bought them in 4K, and it was such a pleasure to revisit them. And I gave the first movie, by the way, a perfect score because honestly, with what it's trying to achieve, I think it does it perfectly, and you really don't see the time going. It just flies away and you're having such a good time.
Don't worry about a thing, on the job. That's what I'm afraid of.
Eddie Murphy, Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Having said that, let's jump into the second movie, which is a bit different because it's directed by Tony Scott. So it's the guy who made Top Gun, it's the guy who made True Romance and The Last Boy Scout. So he's got a very different style. He's got a very action-oriented style. For example, if you want to compare this franchise to Bad Boys, like this is the Bad Boys 2 type of Beverly Hills Cop film. As in, it goes completely insane. If you just look at the editing, if you look at the way that everything is shot and lit as well, it really looks like an action film, while the other film kind of looked like a bit of a hybrid police investigation, drama, comedy. You didn't really know exactly what it was, and you could really tell because the firepower has gone up to the level of heaven. To be honest, there are so many big guns appearing in this film and so many different explosions, and I actually think that the criminals are way more interesting in the second movie that they are in, well, all of the other ones put together. You've got this big, tall, blonde girl. Also, I have to point out something. It's incredibly weird that this entire franchise, all of the villains, they're very like European, but mostly German, like stereotyped. They have these really strong cheekbones and they're really tall, they're really beautiful, but like in a scary way. And I don't know why they decided to do that, but it was quite funny. Actually, I'll let you know what this is about in case you haven't seen it or you need a reminder. After the police captain of the Beverly Hills Department, Bogomil, gets shot, Rosewood, Taggart, and Axel Foley endeavor to ascertain who is behind the Alphabet crimes, which are behind a series of mostly high-end store robberies. And it's really funny because this movie, you could really tell that Eddie Murphy told Judge Reinhold to go completely insane.
You just hit a squad car!
I know, it's okay. I know the guy. He's a jerk.
When we were talking about character development, this is something that you can see really in this second movie, because Judge Reinhold was playing that really stereotypical kind of like angel cop where he would do everything by the book, he would follow every single rule, he would be kind of awkward around action scenes, but also around the fact that he needs to ascertain himself to be able to like actually cuff people. For example, there are so many funny moments where he's just like taking out his badge and trying to like stop people from shooting at them, but it's the worst moment ever. And this person has changed so much because of Axel Foley that in this second movie he's like a gun nut. He's gone insane and he's gone full Rambo basically, like he's wearing this big long coat and sunglasses as well. He's become basically really cool. He's changed his personality quite a lot and it makes sense because of what happened in the previous film. But one thing that maybe was kind of weird is that he kind of overshadows Eddie Murphy in this movie. Like I was sitting there being like, this is more a baddie cop movie than the previous one was when I think about it. And at the end of the day, I also think that the investigation is way more interesting. The jokes work still as well, and Eddie Murphy has so many different riffs.
What are you, a fucking art critic? No. They got the money, want to live in a donut? Let them live inside a donut. You know, people get money and lose their mind. So people say, I want to live in a roundhouse. You got the money for it? Fuck it.
And of course, we're going back to Beverly Hills, which is kind of weird at this point, because why would you have two movies where you go back to Beverly Hills always to help them out with a crime? I don't know, I felt like they could have tried something different, and this gets even more stale with the third movie, which does it once again. So I'm sitting here being like, I know it's called Beverly Hills Cop, but maybe you could do something different. You don't have to go back to Beverly Hills. I still gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because honestly it was incredibly enjoyable. The performances are still as good, the music is still as iconic, it has that classic 80s energetic vibe to it, and at the end of the day it is also incredibly well shot. The only thing that I didn't like about it is, as I said, is that the pacing is not as well handled as in the first movie, mostly because you can tell that it's not Eddie Murphy's show anymore. All these side characters are really trying to steal his thunder, and it's a bit of a shame. This gets even worse though in the third movie for completely different reasons. First of all, the actor John Ashton is completely absent from the third movie, something that I still don't understand. Apparently there is a really interesting history behind the production of this film. It was a huge mess. Eddie Murphy apparently was incredibly depressed with the advancement of his career back then, and because of that he actually thought that Axel Foley, because of everything that happened in the previous films, shouldn't really be that much of a comedic relief character, and he should be more serious, especially with what happens in the third movie, where basically, as I said before, because of a crime-related thing, the commissioner of the Detroit police gets killed and Eddie Murphy goes on a revenge spree. And it's exactly what happened. And I know that this doesn't really sound like an R-rated police comedy movie, and it's exactly the problem. Like, Eddie Murphy is not really playing Axel Foley in the same way. This kind of feels like Die Hard meets John Wick, where you could tell that Axel Foley shouldn't really be doing some of these things, but he still does them because they want this movie to be darker, and the comedy doesn't work at all.
Get the fuck out of here.
No, I cannot. It's serious.
Honestly, like, I was writing my review for this film and I was like, I didn't laugh a single time, and there are some things actually that don't make sense at all when it comes to Axel's character, and you could really tell that there is something wrong with this film. There is one moment, for example, when he's going back to Beverly Hills once again, and these criminals are basically hiding behind the front of a theme park. So he wants to get into this theme park. He asked another cop to book him an appointment with the security director, but apparently he didn't do that, and it is never explained why. So he goes at the front desk and he's like, can you let me in? I have an appointment. And she's like, no, I don't have it. And then he's like, what do you mean? Just let me in. How much is the ticket? Oh, it's too much. I'm not gonna pay it. Then there are two security cops coming from behind him being like, are there any problems, sir? Like, what are you doing? Why don't you want to pay for a ticket? And Eddie Murphy gives the weirdest performance ever. He's not able to convince this lady who works at the theme park to let him in. So he ends up paying the ticket like a normal customer. And I was sitting there being like, this is not Axel Foley. This is not the same character that I've watched across all of these different films, where he managed to get into the most exclusive places by telling so many incredible lies that were so incredibly detailed that it was impossible not to believe them. Like, he even managed to get access to people's work computers so he could do some kind of internal Google searches. Like, this guy is incredibly clever when it comes to doing that stuff, when it comes to actually gaining access to the clues that he wants to pursue. He's not as clever when it comes to putting all those clues together and actually like getting someone convicted. Like, he wants to kill them. You could really see it in this movie that he's gone completely insane. He doesn't really care, and he wants to kill everyone that crosses his path. It's so weird because basically, like, he's a witness to the death of the commissioner, so he has seen the criminal himself. He knows exactly what he looks like, and of course he can place him there on that specific point at Detroit where the commissioner got killed. So he manages to get to the theme park inside, and he meets the director of security, who is the same criminal who killed this commissioner. And I'm sitting here being like, when you have a cop as a witness, especially in the 90s, let's not even talk about today, because today maybe you'd need someone else to corroborate your story, or you would need like police footage that you have like on you, like a body cam or a cop car cam, like it doesn't really matter. But back then, are you actually telling me that if a cop was a witness to a murder of another cop and he managed to find the guy and identify him specifically, he wouldn't be able to just be like, case closed, okay, arrest him? That sounded incredibly weird. Like, they will go through so many different machinations, and he keeps going back and forth to this theme park and getting caught, and they never manage to kill him or do anything with him. And I'm sitting here being like, the script is a mess. And apparently they knew that the script is a mess, and there were even some moments where apparently Eddie Murphy refused to do the coverage when basically other people were interacting with his character, and you have moments where you have the back of his head. He refused to do those shots because basically he was incredibly bored by the script and by where it was heading. I really don't understand why this movie sucked so much. Mostly because it was directed by John Landis, who has made so many cool movies with Eddie Murphy, like Coming to America, but he's also made films like The Blues Brothers, An American Werewolf in London. He's someone who actually knows his shit, and there is no way that he'd be able to make a movie that is so incredibly forgettable and so incredibly stupid. There are some moments which are like next level stupid, where basically there is this character that we've met in the previous film, as in the first Beverly Hills Cop movie. He used to work at the art gallery and he was kind of funny, and basically this guy is working as a gun salesman in the third movie, and he's selling this weird machine gun which has so many incredible useless like gadgets to it, which is probably like a funny joke about how in the 80s and the 90s, or even a little bit before that, we used to like create these weird machines filled with gadgets that weren't really necessary. They just looked cool, and at the end of the day they would become obsolete just because no one would actually buy them. And this scene of course brings back to something that happens in the third act, where basically the film goes full Die Hard in the theme park. Everything gets destroyed, people get shot left and right. The movie literally has no sense at all, but I gave it 2 stars out of 5 just because of that scene, because it was honestly the only enjoyable part of the entire film. The gun comes back and it's gag one after the other after the other. Like Axel Foley clicks on a button and a music starts playing and he hides. Then he clicks on a button, something comes out of the gun, but it's something completely useless. And then finally, like the third or even the fourth time, he finally pushes another button and the gun does what it needs to be done, which is try to kill the bad guys. And I don't know, it was just such poor taste comedy. I was sitting there being like, why am I still here? But basically, those are all the things that I could say about the Beverly Hills Cop films, because at the end of the day, they get worse one after the next. And the third one has literally zero enjoyment because you could tell that no one was having a good time. I mean, the actor who was playing Taggart as well is completely absent from this film. And they said basically that he retired, so he wasn't able to come investigate, which makes a lot of sense. But they replaced his guy with an actor who is called Hector Elizondo, and he's a character actor who you've probably seen in a lot of other films, and he literally looks like a copy and paste version of the same actor that we had before, but it just doesn't make sense because he's not the actor that we know. So it seems like they wanted to like fool the people who weren't really paying that much attention to the previous films, so that they would think that he was still there, that Taggart was still there, even though he wasn't. And even Judge Reinhold, do you remember that in the other film I was complaining that he basically stole Eddie Murphy's thunder a little bit in the previous film? This time around it's the complete opposite. He's become a very powerful person within the LA/Beverly Hills department, but at the same time is like a bookkeeper. He's just sitting behind the desk, and it goes completely on the opposite like side of everything that had been established with him within the previous films. So he's incredibly boring in this film, and he doesn't really participate to the investigation as much as he's like saying, oh no, Axel is in danger, I have to go and help him, and that's it. Like, it's not a buddy cop movie anymore. This movie kind of has some of the aspects that made Beverly Hills Cop good, but it doesn't really put them together in the right way so that it delivers on a good adventure, on a good movie, and it's definitely not memorable. And honestly, I will not rewatch it. And when I started watching these films again, I remember that I didn't like the third film, and it's one of those that I didn't rewatch as often because even as a child I knew that it wasn't really that good. Having said that, these are all my thoughts for Beverly Hills Cop, the entire franchise. Now let's head into the new movie. What did I think about it? What's my review? Is it sad? Because to be honest, when you look at all of the other requels that have been made in the last few years, I mean, it makes the main character look really sad because of course they've aged out of their role and they're trying to behave like they were still the same person, and it's incredibly cringy. Did they do that with this film? Let's find out. This was honestly a really good surprise. I really had a good time. I was honestly sitting there being like, crossing my fingers, is this gonna be good? I hope it's gonna be good, because the last movie was not as good as we remembered and we needed this one to work. Well, let's start by giving you a little bit of a synopsis and then we'll go deep into my analysis and how they improve on a lot of things that I actually talked about in the last few minutes of my video. This movie is directed by Mark Molloy in his directorial debut, and it stars of course Axel Foley, who has returned to Beverly Hills after his daughter Jane's life is threatened. She and Axel team up with her ex-boyfriend, who is played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and his old pals John Taggart and Billy Rosewood to uncover a conspiracy. I feel like it's something incredibly difficult to do when you're trying to ride the nostalgia waves, but at the same time you want to innovate, you want to try to tell a different story. And when I was looking through different interviews of Eddie Murphy, I mean, he's the first person to say that the third movie was actual crap and he doesn't want to talk about it that much, and he also seems to be incredibly in love with John Landis' way of working. So I don't know, he didn't really say that much when it comes to why that movie didn't work out. He just wants everyone to forget about it, and he actually said to Joseph Gordon-Levitt that he shouldn't rewatch that film to get ready for his role for this new movie here, just to tell you how much everyone involved with that movie just wants to forget about it. One thing that I like about this movie is the fact that there There are certain things which are redone, which are hints, of course, to the previous franchise, but they are modernized, they are contextualized. There are a lot of things that probably wouldn't work as well today. And one of those things, for example, is the fact that you do that kind of Beverly Hills montage, tuning in with the music, because it's something that they've done every movie one after the other. And fun enough, with this movie, they actually do something different and they explore Detroit, which is something that I complained about, well, in the last previous films, where they're trying to set this binary in between Beverly Hills and Detroit, but we don't actually spend that much time in Detroit unless it's for like the beginning crime, and then we immediately jump to Beverly Hills. So I really love this idea of exploring how the real people of Detroit talk about Axel Foley and how they interact with him. It was incredibly fun. And if there is something we can notice, of course, is that Eddie Murphy hasn't aged at all. Like, he looks exactly like the character, he embodies the character, and across different interviews, once again, most critics have said that he really embodies this character the most when you look at his filmography, just because he has good vibes to him. And this is probably why the third film didn't work at all. You just look at Axel Foley as played by Eddie Murphy and you're sitting there being like, this is such a good guy, I just want to spend some time with him and solve crimes. This kind of have Scooby-Doo vibes at the end of the day. It doesn't really have David Fincher vibes at all, and I'm glad they were going back to that.
Who the fuck are you? Who the fuck am I? Who the fuck are you? You must not have got the memo, nigga. You didn't hear about the Winnipeg trade? I'm the new man up in this bitch.
I also think that it's interesting that we're exploring a little bit of Axel Foley's intimate life, which is something I complained about in the previous films. We find out that he actually got married and now he has a daughter, and he's estranged from this daughter. They haven't talked in a really long time, and their dynamic is actually quite interesting. And this also fills up my checklist when it comes to writing interesting female characters, which is something that they don't really focus that much in the previous films. We also have new additions to the cast. Kevin Bacon is playing a really cool villain, and fun enough, it still aligns itself with the German kind of villain vibes that I talked about across the entire franchise. But Kevin Bacon is just, he's got so much magnetic energy. He doesn't have to do that much, and immediately you believe that he is what he says to be. And we also have another cop played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, which I fell in love with as well, because he's got his flaws, of course, he's got his ways of working, but he's kind of trying to be an Axel Foley type. He wants to commit himself to a certain investigation, doing no matter what, so that he can catch the criminals, and them together, it actually works out quite well. Another thing that I really loved about this is that, once again, we're not establishing a new set of criminals that we don't really know that much. We are actually doing something different. We're talking about police corruption, and we're talking about someone in the police being basically bad and using their power to actually commit crimes, and I really love that. I feel like it's something we have not explored before. We have put the police a bit on a pedestal when you think about it back in the 80s and the 90s, and we can't really do that. This is what I was talking about before when it comes to modernizing things, and this is something that they did really well with this film. The riffing part still works when it comes to Eddie Murphy's persona. He still has the exact same type of energy. Of course, he's aged, and you can see that in most of the action sequences as well, but also in the fact that he's too old for that shit. There is a point, for example, when he's going to a hotel and he starts like coming up with some weird excuse on why he should be able to basically be given a room at this expensive hotel in Beverly Hills but for free.
Yes, I'm Nigel Applebottom with Bon Appetit. And I was wondering if... to hell with this, I'm just too tired. Do you have any rooms available? And I was like, that's such a clever way of maturing the character of Axel Foley, who basically doesn't have to riff all the time. He doesn't have to be a smartass all the time. Sometimes he can just be an earnest person who wants to sit in a hotel room and just relax for a little bit. And this movie really enhanced that bit. One thing that I liked as well is the exploration of the characters that we know, like Taggart and Rosewood, of course. The fact that Taggart is back working again and he's actually the commissioner of the Beverly Hills Cops makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because he's kind of like in between Rosewood and a normal cop, meaning that he has that kind of energy and rogueness to him, but at the same time he's a very stoic but also traditional person, so it makes sense that he would make a good commissioner. Most of the jokes around him have to do with the fact that he's aged so much and that he's married and he hates the married life, so at the end of the day it's not really that smart humor, but I'm still really happy to see him because I really missed him from the previous film. When
it comes to Rosewood, it makes total sense. The fact that he started his own investigation, kind of like detective agency, it makes so much sense. He was born to play that kind of role, and actually made no sense what he was doing in the third film, as we discussed earlier. Maybe the only thing I would have to criticize when it comes to this film is the fact that he's not part of the film for that long. He's there mostly at the beginning and mostly at the end, and in the middle part you're just like, where is he? Isn't he supposed to be here with us? So I don't know if that has to do with his contract, or the fact that maybe he wasn't available to shoot as many scenes as possible, or maybe he doesn't want to do action anymore because he's just too old for that shit. But I missed him a little bit in the middle act of this movie, so I just want to warn you, in case you haven't seen it, that that is a thing, of course. Maybe let's get into spoilers and talk about the details of this film, and mostly on why I recommend it and why I think it's an actual excellent legacy sequel. Let's talk about the riffing, for example, and the comedy of this film, which works really, really well. There is a moment, for example, when there are some criminals who are searching a place, and Axel Foley just comes in and starts like blabbering, of course, because that's what he does. He starts pretending that he's one of the main criminals as well, and he's there to help them search. And it's such a clever thing to do when you think about it, because of course these goons, they want to be able to know everyone within this agency, right? Especially because it is people who are hired to do a job, and it makes a lot of sense. And of course his lying is discovered very, very quickly, and also it makes a lot of sense that while we are sort of like searching Rosewood's Bureau of Investigation, he has like a Rambo knife. This is kind of like going back to the fact that he's a bit of a gun nut and that he loves his action hero memorabilia, and you could see posters like on the sides of the room as well. And I was sitting there being like, this is a good way to still do character development 30 years after the movie actually came out. Let's talk about the fact that it is really well known that in LA and Beverly Hills there is a lot of traffic. There is a lot of traffic, and it's almost impossible to do realistic car chases. So they came out with a really clever way of doing that, and basically Axel Foley ends up stealing an incredibly tiny car, which is used by the police, who actually issues fines for traffic jams and for cars that are parked basically where they're not supposed to be.
What the hell you think you do?
What the hell you think you doing? I said pull over now!
And that's how they get away with doing car chase where there's a lot of people around, a lot of cars, and a lot of just random tourists as well. One thing that I love, of course, is the fact that there are way more people in the streets, a lot more influencers that you can see around, that the movie kind of always goes back to see their reactions. These incredibly superficial looking like blonde women with their chihuahuas, which is something that is very true to nowadays, that is probably even more true than in the 80s, where in the 80s maybe you had a couple of very eccentric people, but most people were like normal traditional people. While today every single person is trying to be their own individual, they have their own style, and especially in that area you would see a lot of weird looking people, and I'm glad that the movie concentrated on that as well, visually speaking anyway. Talking about the chases, we have a really, really fun one, of course, starring an helicopter which is being driven by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and it's really funny because they use the fact that he's been basically moved from the LA police investigation team to the Beverly Hills one because he crashed the police helicopter. So of course he's got a bit of a driving anxiety when it comes to actually driving this thing, and they end up doing some of the weirdest shit ever. One thing that I appreciated is the fact that there is a lot of practical effects, and across different panels they talked about how it was important for them that the helicopter chase sequence was done real, and you could see really the difference. You could tell that a lot of these action sequences really have a lot of weight because you can tell that they've been done practically, they've been done like in the good old days. And this is the perfect type of filmmaking that you have to do when you're trying to revive a franchise that has been loved across so many different, I was about to say planets, but no, across so many different states and nations and, well, people around the world, and you want to keep it real. One thing that is really interesting is the daughter and father dynamic. Of course, it seems very cliche, but I find it very cool how basically, since she's a lawyer, she's using her own knowledge of LA politics to actually lie her way into places better than Axel Foley used to. Because there is something that is worth saying when it comes to modernizing things, is that you could get away with riffing way more in the 80s and in the 90s because most people didn't really have access, well, to the internet because it didn't really exist back then, so they were not really knowledgeable. So if you said that you were working for Rolling Stones magazines and you're writing an article about Michael Jackson, people would actually believe you, because at the end of the day, we're close to LA. Why would you lie about it, right? But nowadays, if you try to lie about those kind of things, most people, especially in exclusive places, they look at you being like, okay, give me more details. Okay, let me know. Yeah, show me maybe your card. Show me your press pass. Give me more. Give me more. So it's really interesting to show the limits of Eddie Murphy's riffing when it comes to him being a Detroit cop and not knowing things about the politics of California and specifically Beverly Hills. So it really helped out the fact that his daughter was there and was able to do it instead of him. One thing that I complained about in the previous film is the fact that Serge is back and it makes no sense at all for him to be basically selling guns. And this time around it actually makes way more sense, because Serge is kind of like an influencer and he knows his way around Beverly Hills. He knows a lot of people and he's the one who manages to get them in a viewing of this house where basically Axel Foley is looking for certain clues / proof. I also really like the cartel angle. I feel like it's something that is worth exploring today more than maybe in the 80s. And I also really love that scene where basically they go to this club and the main cartel boss is queer. I mean, he's not confirmed, but he seems to be definitely queer. And I really like that. Most of the fact that you would be able to be the lead of this criminal organization, but at the same time be, well, your own person at the same time and be accepted by the community. And it was also really funny to see specifically this actor, who is a character actor we've seen so many different times, play something different. He played it very well. Talking about playing things very well, I really loved Kevin Bacon once again, and I love the fact that his motivation when it comes to why he's a villain is that as a cop is not paid well enough. And it makes a lot of sense. Inflation is insane nowadays, and it makes sense that he will go deep into crime to actually get a little bit more money. At the end of the day, I really love this film. I feel like maybe the pacing was not perfect, and I would have really loved them if they stayed a little bit more in Detroit instead of going straight away once again to Beverly Hills, even though the motivation was really clear. And I also like the fact that I complained about it in the previous films. It was kind of weird that every single time at the beginning of these films someone close to Axel dies, there is way too much pathos into that, way too much tragedy. So I love the fact that it's more like his daughter is being threatened, but no one actually dies at the end of the day. And this makes for a movie that is more tonally consistent, which is exactly what we needed from this franchise 30 years later at the end of the day. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars rating, mostly because it is really good. It's not incredibly good, so I couldn't give it a perfect score. And I think it's at the same level of maybe the second movie, if not maybe a little bit better, just because my expectations were incredibly low. Not necessarily because it is a better movie, but I really enjoyed it and I really hope that you did. But anyways, those are all my thoughts when it comes to the Beverly Hills Cop franchise. I had such a good time shooting this video and revisiting all of these films. This used to be my granddad's favorite franchise, and it's been quite an emotional week for me revisiting them without him for the first time ever and shooting this video as well. He's unfortunately passed away and he won't be able to see this last film, but I really hope he gets a TV wherever he is right now and he gets to experience it by himself. I even have a weird dream where I met Eddie Murphy and I was able to tell him how much he meant for me, for us, because we watched every single Eddie Murphy movie together, and this was a lot. Yeah, so I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I really hope you enjoyed these films.
Oh, fuck it. Let's get a porterhouse.
We're
Not
talking.
getting any younger, you know.
Come on,
But
let's
not
go.
one word to Jane, and that's an order.
Not one word to Jane. This is gonna be fantastic. Trust me.
If you'd like to see more, I actually have more videos going across the same themes. I'm going to link you to all of them here at the bottom, and then as usual I'm going to show you right up here what I'm working on that is coming out in the next few weeks. Having said that, don't forget to smash that like button, because every single time that you do that you give support to Eddie Murphy.
Can I count on you?
He said several times that he works on films only if it makes sense and not just because of the paycheck. And the last few films that he's made have been quite fun. They've not been like masterpieces, but at least he's not doing the Bruce Willis thing or even the Liam Neeson thing of making as many films as possible, even though they're not really that good, and I appreciate him for that. So all of your likes are gonna go to his career and to him as a person, because he seems to be such a lovable guy, and I hope that this movie gets him even more recognition in Hollywood. Having said that, I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Back in the 90s, I was in
action.
Shaxel Foley, Beverly Hills Cop, freeze!
Okay, let's try without the banana, and it's Axel, not Shaxel.
Shaxel.
Axel.
Whatever you say.